Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for the end of October 2022. This feels a little sweet as an AM reading video because it'll be my last one in a little while. I mean, really, it's not that long of a hiatus I'm taking, but in November I will be partaking in National Novel Writing Month, trying to write 50,000 words in a month, and I tend to do vlogs, weekly vlogs in November, and I incorporate my reading into those vlog entries and then do like a reading wrap up at the end of the month. So yeah, these weekly videos will be going away, but for just a little while. Anyway, as always, I will be starting with a review of the next short story in this collection by Dorothy Parker, which I've been reading from since last May, and this is actually something I will be putting down throughout the entirety of November, and part of me is a little relieved in a way. I think for a couple of reasons. You know, I've made this into sort of a chronic project, and maybe I'm chafing a little bit against, you know, the assigned nature of it all, insofar as it's assigned just by me. And also, we're at the very end of this collection of short stories, and we're in her sketches that she wrote early in her career. And they're not speaking to me quite as much anyway, but, you know, I'm stubborn, so I will see this through to the end. But anyway, the sketches I read this week were called Dinner Party Anthology, which she published in the Ladies' Home Journal in 1920. And yes, they're just character sketches, blocky character sketches about a variety of people at a dinner party, starting with the host, who's someone who's very hard on her servants, but everybody around her seems to think she's fine, so I think it's supposed to be class commentary going on there. We have one single man who fancies himself more of a comedian than I think anyone else thinks he is. And then we have a small variety of couples. We have the snobbish couple who, you know, are horrified that they might mix with a lower class set. We have the couple that comprises of a woman who's completely obsessed with her children and really won't participate otherwise, and her husband who is a bit of a wallflower. And then we have the couple with the woman who fancies herself a medium, which I think is commentary on the times, I suppose, and her husband who is obsessed with the 2 years he lived in Chicago before moving to this smaller town, and the only time they have guests at home is somebody who lived in New York forever, so, you know, New York City, I should say. So yes, these are supposed to be, I guess, funny commentaries about these types of people, but it's very dry because, you know, it's not a story. I think I've said this before about another one of her sketches. It seems like background material. It's a writing exercise. So it's not my favorite, but I'm being stubborn. I'm sticking with these sketches. And I think they do hint to the fact that she is a bit of a satirist, and it comes out better in the short stories that I've been reading in this collection for the past year and a half. Next, I finished Fencing with the King by Diana Abu-Jaber, which I started last week, and I'm glad I stuck with it. I was a little hesitant, I think, when I was talking about this last week. It had a bit of a slow start, I think, to the narrative, but things actually picked up a lot. There's a lot of real-time action in this book, in fact, that is based somewhat heavily on Abu-Jaber's actual family history. It takes place in the 90s in Jordan, which I think it's a double whammy for that. I think she's trying to comment on a specific political time of increased peace or peace or the hope for peace, for example, between Israel and the Palestinians, where the Jordanians were heavily involved in that, and also peace between Israel and Jordan. Jordan, of all the Middle Eastern nations, is perhaps somewhat most closely linked to modern-day Israel, particularly with the issue of Jerusalem, which for a while was under joint control between Transjordan and Israel. So, and also Jordan has a very high concentration of Palestinian refugees. And I think in general the makeup of the country is that, you know, they're people who consider themselves Jordanian and people who consider themselves Palestinian aren't too different from one another. You know, these ethnic identities are much more porous than, you know, any borders that come along. So that's a little bit of a backdrop, but this is about a family, the Hamdan family, and it takes place when King Hussein is turning 60 years old, and he has this month-long of festivities, and one of his major government officials is a man named Hafez, whose brother Gabe used to fence with the king, hence the title, back in the day when they were young. And Gabe has since moved to the US and married there and has a child there, now an adult child. But this adult child, Amani, and Gabe are invited back for the festivities in Jordan. And I guess it's an interesting time for Amani to go over and try to reconnect with family history. She is a divorced poet who's kind of in hot water in her professorial job in Syracuse, New York. So it's kind of a good time to, get away for a little bit and learn more about her father, where she had, I think, very limited idea of his past with the king. And then also, on top of that, she stumbles upon some poetry by her grandmother, Natalia, who was a Palestinian refugee, and it sends her on this quest to find out more about her family, and it becomes a bit more than just, uncovering old paperwork. In fact, there's a pretty big secret that her uncle in particular is trying to hide, and that goes into commentary about, I think, trying to, well, first of all, the divide between, I guess, Jordanians and Palestinians, and how the trauma of this Palestinian matriarch is something to sort of be swept under the rug. And then more than that, there's issues about land use and land disputes. And I guess I'll leave it there without getting too spoilery. But yeah, things get a bit heated at the end of this novel. And I thought that stuff was pretty compelling. But in general, I can kind of understand why this novel maybe didn't make as much of a splash, because it takes a while to get going. And I also think Amani is a bit of a cipher character. She doesn't have enough meat on her bones. She really is just there to learn things. And her romance that she, is a subplot of this book is not the most intriguing part either, I don't think. So, yeah, things are a little bit uneven, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in here as well. I'm just going to make a brief note of my Victober reading for this month, which is Far from the Madding Crowd and Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. Yeah, here we are at the end of the month, and I'm finally paying some homage to the whole Victober theme of reading Victorian literature, and then these two books have also been at the top of my Goodreads TBR for a while, so I'm excited to get to them, and I am indeed reading them right now, but I think I'm going to put off talking about them because I'm going to do a whole video about these two books, probably in early November. But yeah, not exactly feeling the most successful in a way, I guess, with my Victober reading, or maybe it's more because I'm squeezing it into the final week of the month. But hey, reading is still reading, no matter when you get to it. So let's not angst about silly things here, self. But yes, stay tuned in the next week or two for my reviews, my thoughts of these two books. Next, I am very near completion of Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. This is a historical fiction book that I decided I wanted to read for my mock reads reading this year, which is a personal project to read and rate just a little bit of front list. I mostly read back list, and I felt like my history, or historical fiction, I should say, offerings were a little paltry, so I was really intrigued to try this book, and I like it a lot. This is a book that follows the Booth family, which in American history, the most well-known member of the Booth family is John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Lincoln at the Ford Theater, which I think had a lot more significance than maybe people realize at first, because John Wilkes Booth was part of a very famous theatrical family, and he even has had performed himself at the Ford Theater in front of Lincoln. So, yeah, there's that extra layer on top of the assassination. And then, of course, this book deals a lot more with his family, not only the aftermath of the assassination and what happens to them, but actually most of the book really is about the upbringing of the family and who they were that Booth's parents were immigrants from England, and they had several children, a fair amount of whom died in childhood. And this book chronicles things from the perspective of three of his siblings. Although the way this book is told, it's not a close third-person narrator, really. There's an omniscient presence. It almost reads like a history text. I mean, one that's, compelling and engaging with characters, but there's this sort of distant look, and like it jumps a little bit in time every now and then, even though technically the narrative is mostly chronological, but it does do a little bit of jumping and a little bit of foreshadowing, and even like jumping to, I just read a part in here about Maryland's state anthem, which for being a Northern or Union state was a very Southern sympathetic state anthem that we have. I am a Marylander, and this is a very Maryland heavy book because the Booths lived in Maryland for most of the length of this book. And anyway, I'm just saying that, that section about the state anthem puts in that, by the way, up until 2020, there have been attempts to change the anthem, which have not gone through. So yeah, there's definitely a distance to some of this writing that, like, it knows that it's talking about history, important history. It also follows Lincoln in little interstitial chapters, which almost reminds me of reading a nonfiction work about the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, except I think that that author actually kept things a little more even between Yitzhak Rabin and his assassin, and like building up the story, whereas Lincoln is a far less presence in this book. But I still really like it. I feel like it's very propulsive. It's not, I guess, quite what I was thinking it might be in terms of historical fiction, that I thought might read more like a traditional novel, where this one definitely is saying, hello, I am about important people. There's also like a big presence of ghosts and of fortune-telling in here. Part of that does come from, I think, a contemporary account of Booth's mother having some sort of premonition about him when he was a young child, which who knows if that did or did not happen. My cynicism says I wonder if people really buffed that up after the assassination. But we get to learn a lot about Booth in this book, of course, where he's a pretty straightforward character in terms of his allegiance to slavery and to the Southern cause, even though he also didn't want the Union to fracture. Perhaps more interesting than him is really following his father and his brothers in their very torrid attempts at having Shakespearean actor careers, and they're battling with alcoholism and with reviews that go up and down. Although it's kind of fascinating I felt like, to look into this book when you look at the way that the Booth men, they were celebrities of their day, and I feel like people responded with the passion, or more passion, than, people would respond to celebrity culture and, obsession with television shows or how today. I mean, things could even get pretty violent and brawling in this book about opinions, like people were shooting at them in theaters, I guess, where there was a lot of drinking going on and people forgot that it was a play. And so I thought that was an interesting look. I guess when I read this, or have been, I'm almost finished reading this, sometimes I think about how things aren't so different now. Like, we have this sense, I think we've had it throughout history. People talk about the present as though it's, deviant from the good old days of the past, that we are societally, like, less respectful or something. But then I look at this and I feel like there's talk in here about, this is the Civil War. This is a hugely fractured nation, a hugely violent nation. Even before the war started, there was a lot of violence, including in Baltimore, something that continues to this day, even if the players might have changed. And there's celebrity culture, and there's all sorts of things. So I look at this book, and I really kind of feel better about the present in a way, thinking, we're not on some downward spiral. Humans are just humans. Although it was interesting because I finally listened to Karen Joy Fowler's talk at the National Book Festival, which the Library of Congress just posted. I was there in person, but I left before her talk. And, she went more of the direction of, I'm thinking about how polarized people are now. And I'm like, well, come on. And people were polarized then too. I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I worry too much about people getting too far into the, what's wrong with society today talk. And she also, just to quibble a little bit, talked a little about how John Wilkes Booth's Southern sympathies deviated a lot from his family, and how his father in particular was anti-slavery. But I don't think that's true at all in this book. I mean, he leased slaves. He was part of the system. And in the book, I feel like she's a lot more honest about the fact that maybe the Booth parents said something, but their actions, bespoke to something else. So I felt like, I don't know, that was interesting. I felt like she really oversimplified things in the talk, but I'll still link it down below. And anyway, I still really do like this book, so I am glad I got to it. And the final book I hope to at least start at the end of October is this one. This is Rebel Daughter by Lori Banov Kaufman. This is a book that I've actually tentatively put on monthly TBRs for a while, and then I kept kicking it down the road because, I only have so much time to read and something else would come up that I would think is more pressing. But finally, I think I can finally start this book, and I'm particularly excited, especially because a couple of months ago I read a book called The Orchard by Yochi Brandis, which chronicled a similar time to this book. This book is about the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman Empire, and about how the Jewish people were forced out of the city, and the diaspora, or the second Jewish diaspora, began. And I believe this book was inspired by a young woman who was born in Jerusalem, but ended up in Italy, perhaps, I'm not quite sure, but she even had a tombstone, or at least, if not a tombstone, then some record of her, which is unusual enough for a woman of the time. So the author decided to make a backstory for her, and I'm excited to read it and compare and contrast the history to The Orchard, which I really loved a few months ago. And it also does tie a little bit into my own fantasy project that is heavily based on Jewish culture and history, including of ancient Israel. So I don't know. I'm excited, and I'm also a little wary because I feel like I'm doing a lot of reading and I need to do more writing. But there we go. I was interested to read this anyway, so I think I'll just leave it there and not overthink things any more than I already have. And that about covers it for me now. Hoping to get this up and posted soon, because this weekend I am going to Baltimore, well, Baltimore County, in fact. I live in the DC area, but my parents are in Baltimore County, and my niece is turning 9 years old, so I'm going there to celebrate with her. But also I'm going to bury my cat, Missy, whose cremated remains were sent to my parents' house so we could bury her with our other pets. I recently posted a second memorial video for her when she died in September, but featured prominently in some of my old BookTube videos, and I'm so grateful for that now, to have this record of her. So anyway, I'll link that video down below. And then I will be back hopefully sometime on Sunday before the weekend ends to post my final video of October, which will be my October book haul, which will be a fun way to end the month before I get into the craziness, which is NaNoWriMo. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.